Welcome to Podsdale, where we explore the stories that make Scottsdale truly special. I'm your host, Holly Walter from the city's Office of Communication. Join me as we learn what makes Scottsdale tick. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. April is National Volunteer Month, so we thought it would be a great time to talk about our volunteers. We show our appreciation for them throughout the year, but we especially want to recognize them during Volunteer Month. From feeding seniors to shelving library books, volunteers provide a lot of service to the city. We're here to learn a little bit more about that with our volunteer coordinator, Brandon Chapman. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Holly.
And we're also going to hear from one of our very own volunteers. She actually works in my building, so I see her regularly. Her name is Elena. Samfilippo, but she likes to go by Sam, so we'll be calling her Sam. And Sam, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, let's start with you, Brandon. Can you share what your basic role is as the city's volunteer coordinator?
So I basically oversee the city's volunteer program. So that means I make sure we're following all the regulations that we're supposed to be following, staying on top of all the rules. I work most of the time with staff. I'm making sure that we're doing the things we need to do when we're onboarding volunteers. That includes background screenings that we'll do. And I'm generally a resource for the staff that are themselves working with the volunteers in their various locations. And then kind of the other side of it is I'm sort of basically the public touch point for volunteering with the city. So people want to know how to get involved or what we offer, they'll come to me. And it's not just individuals, but a lot of times it'll be businesses that want to have like a corporate day of giving, local businesses that'll want to come and volunteer with the city. Sometimes it's large corporations that are having their corporate retreat here in the Valley and they want to give something back to the community that they're in. So I'll work with them to find some kind of opportunity with us that we can take advantage of their time and their talents and put them to good use. And I'll go out and I'll speak with groups like, say, the Chamber of Commerce and talk about how they can get involved with the city.
Great. And I know actually you've been with the city for a while yourself, right, Brandon? And you were in a previous role prior to becoming the volunteer coordinator?
I'm coming up on my 18th anniversary on May 1st.
Congratulations.
Virtually all of that with the library. So I've done a little bit of everything at the library, but I think it was like about the 8 years prior to the end of the pandemic, I was the library's volunteer coordinator. So then I slid over and took over the city's position.
Awesome. So I was going to ask what compelled you to move into taking on the citywide responsibilities. It sounds like you were doing this on the library's behalf and had experience in that area, but what really drew you to the position?
Well, so the library volunteer supervisor is really like the one position in the city that is just responsible for volunteers. Everybody else usually kind of gets that tacked on. You're a rec leader, and then they ask you to also oversee the volunteers for this. So I had just a little bit more experience, I think, and they actually came to me, and I was tremendously flattered. Our previous volunteer program coordinator, Cindy Eberhard, suggested me, and I thought, well, that's fantastic. Yep, I was happy to jump into that position.
That's great to have you. Well, the library in and of itself has a lot of volunteers.
They do. It's one of the areas where we have kind of the most in the city. It's a popular destination. They do a lot. It's one of the areas in the city that has volunteer opportunities for teens, kind of all the way up to our adults and retirees. So we can kind of capture a lot of folks.
Great. And we're going to talk about how there's something for everybody when it comes to volunteering, but let's go into some of the numbers. How many volunteer positions do we have, and how many hours do they serve the city?
It's a lot. So for the past fiscal year, we actually had a whopping 3,780 volunteers. They contributed over 114,000 hours. If you want to put a dollar value on their time, that's over $3.4 million, the equivalent of 55 full-time employees. So that's amazing. That's not even counting the volunteers who sit on our boards and commissions and task force. For those folks, you can add in another roughly 160 volunteers. So it is outstanding. It's really amazing. What's a little interesting, that is large a number as that sounds, it is actually down from what we had prior to the pandemic. We were up over 5,000 for a period of time.
Wow.
A lot of organizations are kind of going through post-pandemic a real search to try and get their numbers back up. It's a little different for us because for them, they're looking for volunteers. For us, we tend to get a pretty steady stream of volunteers coming to the city that want to help out. With the pandemic, as all the staff listening will certainly attest to, we changed a lot of policies, a lot of procedures. For people who aren't aware, we sent all of our in-person volunteers home in the middle of March in 2020. They weren't really able to return until the beginning of 2022. So a lot changed in those 2 years.
Sure.
When the volunteers came back, we were really very intentional and deliberate about how we brought them back. So some of those positions had gone away. Part and parcel of the pandemic was the big shift where people were leaving positions. We were a little thinly staffed in some areas, so we didn't feel like we had necessarily the staff support to bring back volunteering quite at the same level. So that's something I was really kind of proud of the city was we didn't just throw our doors back open and say, oh, come on back, which would have been sort of easy to do, but we were very deliberate in being mindful of that we could provide the support for the volunteers that were returning because we don't want to just toss them busy work. We want to make sure that the work that they're doing for the city benefits the city and also that we're engaging them. And so part of that is having the staff resources available to provide for the volunteers and engage them.
That makes sense. And I never thought about the impact of the pandemic on our volunteers, but it's interesting to hear how we tackled that challenge. And it's great to see our volunteers back because really they are part of our Scottsdale family and what they contribute to the city is amazing. We talked a little bit about, or I listed a few examples earlier about some of the things our volunteers do, but there are so many different roles for our volunteers. Can you give us some examples of where people can volunteer and what they can do?
Most definitely. We have people kind of across the city. The vast majority of our volunteers fall within community services. So the senior centers will have various different volunteer jobs that people will be helping with. And that kind of runs the gamut. Just within one of those locations, they might be doing something like blood pressure screenings. They could be helping with the brown bag program, getting food to the folks who are food insecure. And we have the volunteers that are, say, at our community centers. The Vista Del Camino Community Center's food bank is a really popular destination for volunteering. It's also a popular destination for, I mentioned, when groups come. It's a good fit for groups to come and help us out. And at Vista Del Camino, they're doing the Career Center, which is hugely helpful. We were talking about the pandemic. We sent all of our in-person volunteers home, but the career coaches at the Career Center at Vista Del Camino actually stayed on and volunteered virtually during that period of time.
Okay.
So they were providing virtual help for job seekers as they were leaving a position, going to another position. So it's tremendously important to be able to have them. We're going to hear a little bit from Sam about the ambassadors, one of our other favorite programs at the city. The ambassadors are out there working every day, meeting with the folks that are new to the valley, that are coming and visiting. They have a hugely important role with the city. Public safety, fire is sending folks out to do a lot of community education. Also, a lot of things that are keeping seniors safe in their homes, getting rid of tripping hazards, making sure fire alarms are functioning. So it kind of runs the gamut. And one of the other areas that I always like to trumpet about the city, which is, I think, something I'm really proud of, is the schools are asking young people to volunteer now. It's kind of more of an expectation for people to have some kind of component of community engagement with their education. So parents are reaching out to me all the time asking, what does the city offer for teen volunteers? So where I usually direct them to is the library's teen volunteer program. It is geared specifically for teens. The library's youth services librarians are outstanding with those young people. They're great at engaging them, getting them doing lots of things that really are in service of the library, making it more relevant for young people. They can engage them in all these different activities. And then it's kind of a two-pronged volunteering process. They have something that runs concurrently through the school year, which is the Teen Advisory Board. And then they take on, in the summertime, a whole different set of volunteers for the Summer Reading Challenge, which is great too. That's something that is hugely helpful to the library. And it also will bring in, those teens will work with little kids. They'll do a Reading Buddies program so that they kind of bridge that summer season where sometimes your reading skills drop off while you're away for summer, doing all kinds of great things that are giving back. So that's one of the areas I always like to talk to people about is some of the fun things we do for teens. I would love to have more teen opportunities too, because as I said, that's really an area where we're getting more and more interest.
And as our coordinator, because there are so many different things you can do as a city volunteer, is there a process that you go through to find out what our volunteer skill set is and just trying to find that good fit for the volunteer and for the city?
One thing that I really like to kind of make clear to people is, and I touched on this a little bit, we don't just sort of say, oh, you want to volunteer with us? Great. And you're on board, and then we give you, busy work. We really do want to, before we get started, have a conversation about, what are you interested in? Typically, folks will find us through the city's website. We have a volunteer page, and I direct people when they say, how do I get involved? That's usually what I'll say to them. Start there. Because if you just go to the city's webpage, search volunteers, you'll find our citywide volunteer program page. It lists a little blurbs for all the more popular volunteering programs that we have. It'll kind of tell you a little bit about what it's about. For each one of those, there's going to be a contact information there. So if you see something you like, I tell people, reach out directly to them. And then what we'll do is we're going to have a conversation. What drew you to this? What's your background? What's your skill set? And if folks don't see something they like and they want to come to me, I encourage that, because we'll sit down and like you said, we'll just have a conversation. What's your background like? What are your passions, your interests? What kind of skills do you bring to it? Most always we can find something that's a good fit. If we can't, then sometimes, we can go out and try and have a conversation with another department where it kind of seems like, well, we don't do this, but it would be kind of cool if we did, wouldn't we? It's not my position to go dictate to a department and say, hey, you're going to have a new volunteer now. But I am more than happy to go and kind of have a conversation with an area and say, what, have you ever thought about this? This is kind of an interesting success story that we had recently, is we had a police department volunteer. His position went away. The police department reached out and said, could we find another position within the city for him? He's a great guy. And I sat down and we had a talk. It turns out his professional background is in doing government auctions, getting rid of unwanted assets for the federal government. And I thought, well, we do something like that with the warehouse. So I had a conversation with Brett Roper, the warehouse supervisor, and Jen Myers, our purchasing director, and said, what do you think of this? You guys don't have any volunteers doing this job, but this is right in this guy's wheelhouse. Do you want to explore it? And kudos to them for being very open-minded about it. So we brought him in and we had a long conversation about, what's your background like? Here's what we do. It turned out to be a good fit. It's really been a success story for them. Brett reached out to me not that long ago and said, Robert's been working out really well for us. So that is like my happy space. When we find, like you said, find a place that's worthwhile work for the volunteer, but it's in service of the city.
Right. I think it's such a benefit for the city to have those subject matter experts who've worked in other areas and they come and contribute that level of expertise to us as a city. And it also gives an opportunity, I would think, for a volunteer maybe to do something completely different that they didn't do professionally. But it's like you said, they have an interest in a certain area, or they just want to work with maybe a certain group of people, with seniors or with teens. So a lot of options there, it sounds like.
Volunteer application came in, this was years ago, at the library, and the person's profession, they were a musician with the Phoenix Symphony Orchestra. And I thought, oh, this is outstanding. We can bring them in and maybe they can play live music in the library. And I sat down, and that was one of the first things I brought up with the person. And she's like, I don't want to play music. She's like, I've had enough of that. Else. I am retired. I am leaving music behind.
Yeah, that's a great example. So we talked about visiting the website where you can find more information. Can you share more about the application process, or what happens when someone shares their interest in working with the city on a volunteer capacity?
Yeah, like I said, so they can kind of come about it two ways. Like I said, that's a good place to start where you get an idea of what we offer. We have a city volunteer application that we're going to collect from you at some point. You can either kind of start there, and on the back, it has an area where you can check off your areas of interest. I get a lot of those just kind of cold calls, people sending those into me. And I'll reach out to them and I'll kind of let them know I'm going to, hey, you're interested in the police department. I'm going to send your application off to the person who oversees the volunteers for the police department, and they're going to reach out to you and start that conversation. That's kind of our beginning point, collecting the volunteer application. And then if it is a good fit, then we'll go to the next step of bringing them on board, which would be we do a background screening for them. And then the really kind of important part too is then we bring them on board, have a really kind of robust orientation for them so that they really understand the city, everything that we do, so they're not just kind of coming in and saying, well, all I know about the city is I go take these files over here and I do this and I do that. So we want them to be able to go out and be ambassadors for all that we do in the city. So if they come on board, we'd like to have them know a little bit about what's our structure of governance like? How do we do these? What are all the different departments we have, all the different things we do? And then, so we'll do an orientation that covers things like our administrative regulations, everything that's pertinent to the volunteers and their rules. And then give them kind of on the back end of that, then the specific instructions for the area they're going to be at. And hopefully we want them to understand that if they're, say, volunteering with the food bank, that they understand a little something about food insecurity, in our communities. Because it's, just to take that one example, it's easy to think, well, Scottsdale, we're an affluent community, we don't have that. But as we all know, that's not really the case. That we have kind of a wide swath of folks from different socioeconomic backgrounds in our city.
That's great to know. Now, ScottsdaleAZ.gov, search volunteers, and you can find out everything you would like to know and get started if you're interested in becoming a volunteer yourself. So now we're going to turn the time over to Sam and get the volunteer perspective. And Sam actually has been one of the longest standing volunteers we have in our city. And she's very modest, so I'm going to share this with the listeners. But Sam is our 2023 William P. Schrader Volunteer Impact Award winner. Now, this award recognizes and celebrates one volunteer among the thousands who donate their time and their expertise to the city of Scottsdale, and it's named after former William P. Schrader, who served as a true role model of volunteer service. And I think Sam's a great example of that. Sam, can you share a little bit about your time volunteering with the city and how that began?
Oh, gosh. So when I retired, I wanted something to do to fill my time. And I always felt like I wanted to be in an office situation, but I knew I didn't want to have that as my career. And so I thought, one day a week working in an office type situation would fill that niche. And it really has. And so I work in this Citizen Services, the Design Studio Center.
Mm-hmm. And you do a lot of different things for
Yes,
us there.
I do.
Can you kind of outline that? I know that you were one, just to give a little background, so you began volunteering with Scottsdale in 2001, and you were one of the 5 Saguaro High School teachers who started the Ambassador Program, which is about 118 people today. So how did that come about?
Well, so actually, I didn't start in 2001. The Ambassador Program started in 2001 by 5 Saguaro retired teachers.
Okay.
However, I was too young. I'm the baby of the group. So I was too young to retire back then. So I had to wait a couple of years. So it wasn't until 2005.
Okay, just a few years later.
Yeah.
So share with our listeners what our ambassadors do.
Oh, okay. So we have 2 carts. We have one on Main and Brown, and we have one on Fifth Avenue and Marshall Way. And those carts are stocked, if you will, with brochures, magazines, all kinds of maps, different information about the city. So anybody who needs some information, they know where they can go to find that.
They're the go-tos. And was there a certain time of year you think our ambassadors are busiest? Because I think, I'm like right now we're in the spring and it's packed in Old Town, but I can imagine the around the holidays it gets pretty busy too.
Yes, it does. So we've got, Canal Convergence in the fall. We've got Scottsdazzle in the winter time. And then come January, man, we just hit the ground running with trying to remember what we've got. We've got Barrett Jackson Auto. We've got the Arabian Horse Show. We've got spring training. We've got farmers market. We have so many different events. We've got the art walks. So many different events that the ambassadors volunteer at.
So it sounds like that would be a great position for someone who loves to meet people and talk to people and who maybe just loves our city and knows a lot about Scottsdale.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Now, we mentioned it briefly, so let's talk about what you did in your former life. So you were a teacher.
Yes. I taught math for 30 years at Saguaro High School.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So how long have you lived in the city?
Since 1959.
All right. Now, talking about the Scottsdale ambassadors, right now what you do, you mentioned you're in office, you come over to the community design studio, and you're working now more behind the scenes, kind of keeping that program running smoothly. So you do things like log hours, you get the uniforms prepped for our volunteers, you do some training and so much more. Anything else I'm missing there?
So I don't actually train the ambassadors, but I am part of putting together the training.
Okay.
In the summertime, we get together and we have meetings and we decide how we're going to do the welcome back, if you will, for the ambassadors. I do that. I also update databases like contact information and that sort of thing. I log ambassador hours once a month, every month. I help prepare bags for the Adopt a Road program.
Okay, that's another great program the city has.
It really is, yes. I do shredding. I help with mailing if people have things that need to be mailed out, cards or letters or whatever. I help with that. There's just a lot of different things.
Yeah, you do a little bit of everything.
I do.
Keep yourself busy.
Yes.
I know that you actually put in well over 100 hours last season, and you've been doing that for more than 20 years, something that we really appreciate.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have a favorite part of your job?
I don't think so. I just like being with people I like being in an office type situation. It's kind of like a second family. You know, I just like helping other people.
And what do you do outside of the volunteering with the city? Other things you enjoy doing now that you're retired?
Oh, yeah. So I also help 2 neighborhood ladies. I help one on Mondays, just whatever she needs. I do her dishes, or I take her grocery shopping, or whatever she needs. And then on Tuesday, I help a lady do her ironing. She can't stand for long periods of time anymore. So I go over to her house and I do her ironing for her, help her make the bed, whatever she needs.
Sam, can I talk with you after this about maybe coming over and doing some ironing for me?
No.
Darn, I didn't think so.
Aww. And then on Wednesdays, I actually still want to keep my finger in the mathematics teaching pie. I don't want my brain to go to mush. So I actually tutor math students on Wednesdays. And then on Thursdays, I work for the city. And then Friday's my day off.
Nice. Yeah. Well, you definitely have a heart for service. And the 2023 William P. Schrader Volunteer Impact Award was well-deserved for us to award that to you.
Thank you.
Why would you encourage people to volunteer with the city?
You know, like I said before, I always tell people when they ask me, what do you do after you retire? I don't want to just sit around and watch TV all day. I said, no, it's the worst thing you could do. I said, you got to get out and you got to work with people. So anybody who enjoys working with people, being with people, talking to people, helping people, I just think that would just be a great thing for them to do, to just get out and give back to the community, to the city, to whatever, you know, just being with people, interacting with people. I think that's just so important.
And I think those are great parting words. Brandon, do you have anything else to add to that?
She's exactly on point. I've been doing some work with the Blue Zones folks, and that's one thing they always talk about is one of the most terrifying days in a person's life is the day they retire if they haven't spent any time thinking about what's going to happen in the second part of their life.
Exactly. And we actually have had the Blue Zones representatives here on the show to talk about what we're doing in the city with Blue Zones. It's really exciting.
So, and I always also tell people that retirement is a time when you can, I believe you touched on this, Brandon, it's the time of your life where you can do things that you never had time to do before. Take a class, learn how to paint, learn a language, play pickleball, just whatever you've always wanted to do but didn't have time to because you were working. Now you have time to do it.
Exactly.
You know, read a book, whatever.
Great ending thoughts for the episode. And again, like I mentioned, April is National Volunteer Month, but we're so thankful for our volunteers throughout the year. They do so much for the city. And again, Sam, thank you for joining us on the show today. It was great to have you.
Thank you.
And Brandon, thank you for sharing more about our program.
Thank you very much, Holly.
Enjoyed being here.
That's all for this episode of Podsdale. If you enjoyed listening, be sure to subscribe. You can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Feel free to share your thoughts and experiences with us by emailing communications@ScottsdaleAZ.gov. We would love to hear from you. Until next time, this is Holly Walter signing off and inviting you to be part of the Scottsdale story.